The morning it all began felt ordinary. Too ordinary in hindsight. Dr. Elisa Moreira adjusted her ID badge, grabbed a protein bar, and kissed her husband, Dr. Ricardo Lima, on the cheek before heading into São Paulo General Hospital for another grueling day of back-to-back consultations. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The irony. That kiss, quick, routine, mechanical, was the last act of intimacy in their marriage that didn't feel forced. But she didn't know it yet. Elisa was 38, already a respected internal medicine specialist, with a reputation for impossible diagnostic saves and a bedside manner that patients loved. She had mentored dozens of residents over the years, including some of the brightest in the hospital. She believed in hard work, ethics, and second chances. Ricardo believed in being admired. Tall, charismatic, with a polished confidence that could charm a room before he even spoke. He was the hospital's golden boy in surgical oncology, and for years they'd been known as the power couple. Brains, prestige, beauty, and ambition wrapped into one clean narrative. But something had been off for months. At first, Elisa chalked it up to fatigue. They were both swamped. She'd been overseeing a cross-departmental quality initiative. He was leading 2 studies for pharmaceutical trials. Still, there were little signs. Text messages he'd glance at and hide, the sudden late-night surgeries, the subtle cologne shifts. She wasn't paranoid, but she wasn't naive either. The truth came crashing down one Friday evening. Elisa was on her way to deliver a presentation draft to the hospital director when she realized she'd left her tablet in Ricardo's office during lunch. She didn't think twice. His door was always open to her, until that night. She pushed the door gently open, and froze. There, against the blinds, half undressed and entangled, was Ricardo and Camila, the 25-year-old med student Elisa had been mentoring only 2 semesters ago. Camila's laughter died on her lips the moment she saw Elisa. Ricardo's face turned to stone. Elisa! But she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She simply walked out, shut the door behind her, and went home, alone. The days after, Ricardo didn't come home that night, or the next. He didn't even try to explain until 4 days later, by which point she'd already boxed his things and called a lawyer. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said, standing at their dining table like a nervous intern awaiting test results. You meant it enough to lock the door behind you, she replied, arms crossed. You meant it enough to risk your marriage, my career, her education. Ricardo tried the usual excuses, how he felt unseen, how they'd grown distant, how Camila was just a phase. I hope she enjoys your phases, Elisa said quietly. Because I'm done. The divorce was swift. They had no children, no joint property beyond the apartment. Elisa let him keep it. She didn't want to sleep another night in that bed. The hospital predictably buzzed. Whispers in the halls, knowing looks in the elevators. Camila transferred out of her department within 2 weeks. Ricardo stayed, head held high, acting as if nothing had happened. But Elisa did something no one expected. She didn't retaliate. She didn't drag his name through HR. She didn't report the ethical breach. She didn't even tell her closest colleagues the real story. Instead, she transferred up. She applied to the underfunded public hospital in Campinas, 2 hours away, where they needed someone to clean up a failing residency program and revamp internal processes. Everyone thought she was ruining her career. They had no idea she was about to rebuild it. The rise. Campinas Regional Hospital was the kind of place where ambition came to die. It was under-resourced, overworked, and mismanaged. The elevators were slow. The cafeteria food gave more diarrhea than nutrition, and the EMR system hadn't been updated in 6 years. Perfect. Elisa threw herself into the work. She retrained the residents, rewrote protocols, and tackled infection rates like they were personal insults. Within a year, mortality dropped by 12%, and the hospital received its first regional safety award in over a decade. She was unstoppable, and yet, she was still quiet about what had happened. The few who asked why she left Sao Paulo General got a practiced smile and a vague answer. Sometimes change is the healthiest thing you can do. But inside, Elisa was still burning. Not with revenge, but with purpose. The invitation. 2 years later, she received a sleek envelope from Sao Paulo General's new board. An invitation to speak at the hospital's upcoming Executive Leadership Summit. Topic: Rebuilding excellence in low-resource environments. She laughed out loud. She almost tossed it in the trash. But something stopped her. Ricardo would be there. He had just been promoted to chair of surgical strategy. Camila, rumor had it, was now doing a fellowship abroad after leaving him. The fairy tale hadn't lasted long. Elisa thought long and hard. Then she accepted. But not just to speak. She began preparing something else. The hidden files. Over the years, Elisa had quietly collected data. Not just from Campinas, but from surrounding hospitals. Especially those tied to Sao Paulo General's research branches. She'd found a pattern. One no one else had noticed. Post-op complication rates in Ricardo's department had quietly doubled over 18 months. Masked by creative reporting and reclassification of patient outcomes. It wasn't criminal, not quite, but it was deeply unethical. She didn't need to expose it. She could just speak about her success in Campinas and leave quietly. But then she thought of Camila. Of all the women expected to stay silent for the comfort of powerful men. And she rewrote her final slide. The day of the summit. Elisa walked into the executive conference room wearing a tailored navy suit and a calm expression. Heads turned. Some whispered. Ricardo stiffened when he saw her. She greeted him with a polite nod. Elisa. Didn't expect to see you, he said, voice low. Funny. I was invited, she replied with a half-smile. The presentations began. Graph, acronyms, buzzwords. Then it was her turn. She began with the expected. Infection rates, procedural compliance, morale. Then came the last slide. A single heat map of complication reports across the state. Glowing red over Sao Paulo General's oncology ward. Silence. And then her voice, steady. This data reflects a pattern of deliberate misclassification of outcomes tied to a single surgical department. I'll be submitting these findings to the National Ethics Committee this week. All eyes turned to Ricardo, then back to Elisa. And she added, softly, almost kindly, I thought the truth belonged in this room first. For a moment there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the still air of the conference room, thick with tension and disbelief. Then came the first cough, awkward and strangled, followed by shifting chairs and the quiet but unmistakable sound of someone gathering their things too quickly. Ricardo sat frozen, his jaw tight, hands gripping the edge of the polished table. He didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't even pretend to look surprised. Elisa stood at the front of the room, not with smugness, but with clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was revelation. The chief administrator cleared his throat. Dr. Moreira, would you be willing to submit that data to the board for review before escalation? Elisa nodded. Of course. I'll have the full file delivered to the ethics committee and copied to your compliance team by this evening. They moved on. Or at least they pretended to. But the room was no longer the same. The audience had seen something raw, unrehearsed. Not just numbers, but a woman who had turned humiliation into precision, grief into control. A ghost from the past who now held the power to redraw futures. She walked out of the room 30 minutes later, her heels echoing on the hallway tiles, chin high. Behind her, voices broke into hurried whispers. The sound followed her like a low wave, but she didn't turn back. Later that night her phone buzzed. A message from a number she hadn't seen in years. Can we talk? Please. She didn't answer. The next morning a call came from reception at her hotel. Visitor. He'd been waiting for half an hour. She debated saying no. But something in her chest, curiosity or closure, pushed her to go down. Ricardo looked tired. Hello. His hair was thinner, his posture different. The man who once commanded surgical theaters like an emperor now looked like someone who didn't know how to sit still without being told to. "I didn't come to fight," he said quickly, standing when she approached the table. She gestured for him to sit, but said nothing. "I wanted to apologize." She raised an eyebrow. 2 years late. "I know," he sighed. "I was a coward. I made a mess of everything. Camila, she left a year after. Said I wasn't who she thought I was. She wasn't wrong." Elisa sipped her coffee. "I watched you today. You were incredible. You always were. I just didn't see it until..." He stopped himself. "That's not your problem." "No, it's not." He swallowed hard. "You always had this grace. Thought I was the ambitious one. But you built something better from ruins. You helped give me the ruins," she said, her tone neutral. "But I built the rest without you." He looked away. "The board, they're reviewing my role. The data you showed, some of it was hidden from me, but some I ignored. I'll probably lose the chair. I didn't come to destroy you, Ricardo. I came to tell the truth. For once." "And now," he asked, "what happens now?" "I go home. To Campinas. To a hospital that needs me. To my team. To peace." He leaned forward, voice low. "Could we talk again sometime? Just to talk?" She stared at him, not with anger, but with finality. "I don't owe you conversations. And you don't get access to the healed version of me just because you regret breaking the old one." He stood. "Goodbye, Ricardo." That should have been the end. But it wasn't. 2 weeks later, she received a call from a journalist. Leak. Someone had forwarded her presentation slides. The story was about to go public. She hesitated. This wasn't part of the plan. She hadn't wanted headlines. She just wanted the board to act. But then the journalist said something that made her heart still. The documents mention a flagged case. Patient 12A? Elisa froze. She remembered that number. It was a teenage girl. Leukemia. Transferred back to Sao Paulo General 3 months ago after being declared in remission, only to relapse and die from sepsis days later. It had been labeled a non-preventable event. But Elisa had seen the chart. And now she knew. The complications were post-surgical. Ricardo had been the attending. She asked the journalist not to run the story yet. Then she made a call to someone she never thought she would. The girl's mother. When the woman answered, her voice was soft, broken. "Is this about Clara?" "Yes," Elisa said gently. "And I think you deserve the truth." The mother agreed to meet. They sat in a cafe off a quiet avenue. Elisa brought everything. Charts, reports, comparative data. She didn't promise justice, but she offered something almost as rare in healthcare. Transparency. The mother wept, quietly, then asked, "Why are you doing this?" Elisa thought for a long moment. "Because someone once thought I'd stay silent too." When she left, her phone buzzed again. A hospital board member from Sao Paulo General. "We're convening an emergency review. The story is spreading. This could affect the entire research network." Elisa didn't smile. She didn't need to. She'd already won. Not by revenge. Not by scandal. By refusing to stay small. By daring to stand, when others hoped she'd sit quietly and disappear. The following weeks unraveled like a slow-motion landslide. The story hit the press, not just locally but nationally. A respected medical journal picked up the thread, and suddenly, Elisa's presentation was no longer just a quiet warning to a boardroom. It was a case study in ethical courage. Hospitals across Brazil began reviewing their outcome data. Patient advocacy groups praised her for stepping forward. Ricardo was suspended pending a formal ethics investigation. The board tried to downplay the damage, calling it internal misclassification, but leaked memos showed he had been warned multiple times. He'd ignored those warnings, worried that acknowledging surgical complications would compromise funding tied to the hospital's research grants. Camila issued a public statement from her fellowship abroad, a mix of apologies, denials, and silence. Elisa didn't respond. There was no satisfaction in dragging anyone through the mud. The truth was its own sentence. But with attention came disruption. Elisa's hospital in Campinas was flooded with media requests. Some of her staff worried they'd be pulled into the vortex. There was tension, envy from colleagues who once saw her as just another face in a broken system. Her closest resident, Leandro, pulled her aside one night after rounds. "You never told us why you left Sao Paulo." "Not really." Elisa gave him a long look, then smiled faintly. "Because it wasn't the important part of the story." He nodded, understanding more than she said aloud. 1 week later, an invitation arrived. Not from a hospital board this time, but from the Ministry of Health. They wanted her to join the National Advisory Panel on Medical Transparency and Patient Safety, a newly formed initiative, born directly from the fallout of the Sao Paulo case. It wasn't a symbolic offer. They wanted her leadership. But there was a catch. She'd have to leave Campinas. Step away from the hospital she helped revive. From the residents she had mentored like family. From the frontline work that kept her rooted. She sat alone in her office that night, lights off, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Was she ready to leave the hands-on work behind? Was she walking away? Or walking forward? Before she could decide, she received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. She opened it carefully. "Elisa, I know I have no right to ask for your time. I failed you not just in our marriage but in what I allowed to happen under my watch. I wasn't just weak. I was willfully blind. I thought I could control the narrative, that if I looked confident enough, no one would notice the corners I cut. But you did. And the worst part isn't that you exposed me. It's that you did it with more integrity than I ever showed you. You were the better doctor, the better person. And I see now, I never deserved your silence, much less your love. If they ask for my resignation, and they will, I won't fight it. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Ricardo." She read it once, then again, and then she put it in a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of where she'd come from. 3 days later, she accepted the government role. Her farewell to Campinas was quiet. The hospital threw a small gathering. Speeches were made. Tears were shed. She hugged Leandro a little longer than the others. "If you ever lose your compass," she told him, "follow the patients. They'll always point north." The advisory panel work was brutal. Bureaucracy layered on top of policy, tangled interests, political friction. But Elisa was good at untangling things. She built a national reporting framework in her first 6 months. Hospitals began submitting transparent, standardized data. Ethics violations dropped. More importantly, patients began reporting higher trust. One afternoon, during a leadership summit in Brasilia, a young doctor approached her after her keynote. Nervous, hopeful. "Dr. Moreira, I'm starting my residency next month. I read everything about your work in Campinas and what you did at Sao Paulo General. You're why I applied." Lisa smiled. "Then make it count." As the crowd dispersed, she stood by the window overlooking the city. So many people moving below. Rushing, rising, falling, rising again. Behind her, someone called her name. She turned. It was the Minister of Health, flanked by his advisors. "Elisa," he said warmly, "we'd like to talk about the next phase. The country needs a national director of clinical integrity. Someone who understands what it means to rebuild trust." She took a slow breath. The wind outside had shifted. It was no longer against her. "Let's talk," she said. Later that night, back in her apartment, she opened a private email account she hadn't used in a long time. In the drafts folder, untouched, sat a single unsent message addressed to herself. "You will survive this. And not just survive. One day they'll all have to sit and listen while you speak. And they'll remember exactly how they treated you, because your silence won't be part of their comfort anymore." She didn't delete it. She didn't need to. It had already come true. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.